Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with New York City jazz drummer and composer Ulysses Owens Jr. We had a long conversation about his unique path in jazz and his latest 2021 CD, Soul Conversations. His eagerly awaited big band debut on Outside in Music with his new 19-piece outfit known as the UOJ Big Band. Originally from Jacksonville, Florida, he has always had a passion for the music. In his hometown, his family founded Don't Miss a Beat, Inc., a nonprofit organization empowering young people to dream big and give back to their communities through a blend of musical, artistic, academic, and civic engagement programming. Along with his recording life, he was asked by Wynton Marsalis to join the esteemed faculty at the Juilliard School to serve as Small Ensemble Director. He's been there for over 5 years. Enjoy the story.
I'm wonderful, man. I've been looking forward to this.
Me too, man. Thanks for taking a minute out. I appreciate it.
Of course.
The first thing I want to ask you is, before we get into the artistic expression and construction of Soul Conversations, talk to me a little bit about this coming out during a pandemic. Not so much a timetable, but the fact that it's coming out now. We can't tour and do any of that, but it's one of the few ways you can directly connect with fans.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I got, my management team, everybody kind of has been thinking for a long time, like, about this launch, and when I talked to the folks at Outside In, we were like, when do we release it? And initially, we thought that by May, the pandemic would completely be over, and, it would kind of be an afterthought. I think by May, obviously, more people will be vaccinated and what have you. But I do think that people are open to hearing more music, because I think people are sitting at home more. We still are we're moving around, but we're still more just available to take in things versus I think before in the market, unless you were a major player, people just didn't listen to your music. So I don't know. I kind of think it works for me that it's coming out right now, because I think that people have time to pay attention to it in ways that they didn't before. So, yeah, and then, touring with a big band, man, that's expensive. I don't know that I would have been able to do that anyway. Probably ideal scenario, I would have had a run at Dizzy's or something, but I kind of think it works. I definitely didn't want to release any music last year in the heat of it, but I feel like as we're coming out of it, I think it will work for us. So we'll see.
This is your first release on Outside in Music. Talk to me about what it's like to be on a new label and to have such a great big band album out.
Man, well, first of all, this big band album, which I'm sure we'll dig into it a little bit, as throughout this discussion, this big band album has been a labor of love. It has been, matter of fact, this year, 2021, has actually been a year where I have released or am releasing things that have been kind of in my sphere for years. One is the big band album. Two is my entrepreneurship book. I'm also launching a festival. So, I feel like 2021, though it's a pandemic, is kind of the year that I'm able to kind of release things into the world that I've been planning on. So, working with Outside in Music, I knew that this record has been in the making for over 3 years. And I recorded it actually 2019 at Dizzy's. And Nick Finzer and I have always been good friends, and I love what he's doing over there. And he's already kind of been courting me. And I even had other major labels courting me for this record, because everybody had kind of been hearing the band and hearing about the band, because we've been playing in New York, for 3 years now, doing a week. So anyway, but what I liked about Nick was that he and Alan, they had a unique vision, because I remember when Alan had a conversation with me, he said, Ulysses, we really want this album on this label, and he listed all the stuff that he wanted to do. And I said, Alan, all of that is very typical to me, and it's very normal, and I don't want to do anything normal. I want to have a completely unique, out-of-the-box strategy. So if you guys don't want to be out of the box, then don't call me anymore. And so Nick called back. He was like, we want that. And so that's why I'm with them, because I feel like everything that we're doing, how we're approaching it, also the fact that we're releasing it when we're releasing it, the fact that we're releasing a big band album in 2021. There's so many things about this that are unique, but I feel like the label is up for the challenge, and I just like what they represent. I also like who else is on the roster. They're not looking after big names, and they're not trying to be what they're not. They're looking at sort of ushering in the next dimension or the next realm of great jazz art, and multiracial, multi-gender. I think they are the new record label model. So anyway, I love working with them, and the album has definitely been a long time coming, man. This big band. First of all, it stems back to my work with New Century Jazz Quintet, which was a band that I formed probably almost close to 10 years ago. We used to tour Japan primarily, And so when I first started my big band, it used to be called the New Century Big Band because it was sort of an extension of New Century Jazz Quintet, which was fresh faces of the new century playing jazz music. And so then as things with New Century kind of transitioned, I said, well, I'll take it from being the New Century Band to now just the Ulysses Owens Jr. Big Band. But yeah, man, I mean, this has been sort of a legacy that we've been tapping into. I mean, in New Century was all about sort of Art Lakey and Mulgrew Miller and Terrence Blanchard, like basically like these bands that were playing the music and keeping the traditional spirit alive, but with a new sort of folk, and that was what the focus of New Century was, and then that's what the focus of the Ulysses Owens Jr. Big Band. So again, it's been this long time coming. You know, it's a project that has some very, very deep roots.
So talk to me about the big band, the conversation, the assemblage of all of these talents that made this wonderful sound.
So stemming from the whole New Century idea, Mike Dees, who's a very dear friend of mine and also associate producer, Mike Dees said to me, Ulysses, you're no longer the baby on the bandstand. You're not an elder statesman, but you have played with some great cats, and it's now time for you to kind of step into that role of mentor. I kind of was doing that in New Century. You know, also between that time, I'm a professor at Juilliard. I've been there for over 5 years. So it was shifting from, you know, being the baby to now being a guy that people are like, so Ulysses, what do you think about it? So when it was time to form this big band, Mike Dees and I said, okay, here's what we want. We want our colleagues. So I wanted to go and have people in the band that were now like me and Dees. We were once young guys, and now we're professors. Now we're out here in the industry. So the band is probably made of about 20-30% of like my peers. Then Dees said, Ulysses, you now have an opportunity to introduce to the world the next dimension of jazz young greats. So the other part of it is like I got a kid in the band, Wyatt, who on the record, he was 17 years old. His parents were in the audience. So, you know, the other part is this new generation that we're kind of saying, hey, here's how you play this music. And then the other facet of it is gender as well and multinational, because I felt like jazz, particularly in big bands, they're either like all white or they're all black. And I was like, well, where's the Asian community? Where's the Hispanic community? Where are the women? Where are the people that, identify as different sexual orientations? Where is that in the jazz big band? And so Mike and I really sat down and we really looked at, first of all, who are the best players? You know, so we wanted the best players. And then after that, then we started saying, okay, we want to make sure everyone is represented in this band. And so I never forget the first week we played at Disney's, people were like, how the hell did you get a band that sounds as good as it sounds but looks the way it looks? Because everybody had been saying for your band to sound the way it sounds, it can't look that way. And I said, well, first of all, I'm putting my heart and soul behind this. So, and I'm playing, I play with the Basie Band, play with McBride, I play with all those cats. So you get a good drummer and some good arrangements, and you can make a band swing. So anyway, that's sort of the makeup of the band, and everybody's pretty much from the ages of about 17 to about 40 years old.
You're originally from Jacksonville, Florida. And I always think that, taking on a big band is a very unique jazz specimen. Talk to me a little bit about your beginnings in jazz, growing up in Florida, kind of how all this began.
Well, it's funny you say that because growing up in Florida was great because I didn't get I wasn't a jazz baby. When I got to Juilliard, it was funny because all of my colleagues were jazz babies, meaning they were sort of indoctrinated into this music. They heard Miles before the age of 10 years old. I didn't hear Miles Davis until, I probably was like 13, 14, but I didn't really hear him until I was 16. So growing up in Florida, I was exposed to gospel music. That's the first thing because my family is full of a bunch of preachers and gospel singers. My mother's a choir director, and that's actually how I got exposed to the music because we, grew up very religious, very committed to the church. So that was kind of my beginnings. But then my father, being from rural Arkansas, is an incredible soul music aficionado. So he loves, Otis Redding, all those cats. But then because of his R&B love, he also was into like sort of the jazz fusion. So I remember combing through records and seeing like the Crusaders and Ramsey Lewis and like all of that. And so by the time I was maybe 12, 11 years old, he started taking me to the Jacksonville Jazz Festival. And so that was where like the idea of like jazz started changing and or sort of being introduced. Then I had a cousin introduce some Oscar Peterson records. And then I think my first love of jazz was actually jazz fusion, where I fell in love with the Yellow Jackets, and I got to see them perform live here in town. And but things didn't really take off until my first introduction to playing jazz was actually their big band. It was in high school, so I, my ninth grade year at the School of the Arts, auditioned for the jazz big band. I didn't really know what big band was, but they said, hey, if you're a new student, you have to audition for everything. And my first year, I literally get into the top big band. I was the first freshman to ever make it into the top big band and I didn't even know what the hell it was. So I get thrown into this big band and the director's like, hey, welcome. And that's where I started getting introduced to all these great, Count Basie charts and Duke Ellington and, Mark Taylor and all these sort of, like my director was definitely a Basie head. So now, at 14 years old, I'm playing big band, which for me wasn't different than what I was doing on Sunday morning, because I always say to people, particularly the Black charismatic church musically, is very similar to jazz. And so I feel like, playing behind a choir is the same for me as playing behind a big band. It's just different. It's different music. So anyway, so that was how I got introduced to it. And then obviously later on when I decided to go to, I was going to go to Manhattan School of Music, and I got introduced to John Riley. He introduced me to Philly Joe Jones, and, then sort of the rest is history. But then I ended up going to Juilliard because I heard a Lewis Nash record. And I was like, I want to study with that guy. And so, again, I'm keeping out a lot of details. But, yeah, so then once I got to New York, everything was like history. I mean, then the other thing with big band I want to mention, at Juilliard I played big band, and it was cool. But then within a few years, I got the call from Count Basie's band. Butch Miles was leaving. And so my friend was in the band, and I think I had just graduated. And Dee, who was managing the band, who's like Count Basie's niece, she's like, Ulysses, I hear you're this young drummer that knows how to play big band. We want you to take over for Butch. And I was like, oh my God, I would love to. Well, what was supposed to be like that phone call and turn into a tour, I didn't hear from them again for another like a year. So finally they called me and they're like, Ulysses, sorry, we're actually not ready for you. Butch decided to stay on a little later. So we want you to come out and do a gig. So I went out to California, did some gigs with them and Nina Freelon, and they're like, Ulysses, we want you to be the next drummer for Count Basie. Well, at that time, Kurt Elling had just taken me out on tour and said, hey, Ulysses, I want you to be my drummer, and everything on my website is yours in terms of dates. So I was like, do I choose Kurt Elling, who probably has way more work, or do I choose the Basie band, which at that time was kind of going through a management transition? So I went to Kurt Elling. Fast forward, I started working with Christian McBride, and he wanted to sort of retool his big band because he was like, I really got all these charts I want to write. And he's like, man, have you ever played big band? I said, yeah, man, I was going to be the Basie band drummer. He was like, are you kidding me? Yeah, man, I'm getting ready to start my big band back up. I'm going to make you the drummer. I'm going to put new people in the band. And we basically played at Iridium. And I think 6 months later, we did the record, and then we won a Grammy. So it went from it went from me, like, big band kind of being this thing that, I did in high school, I did in college. Then all of a sudden the Basie band, that didn't kind of work out. Then I started working with Christian McBride. And then it's now like, oh, Ulysses is a big band drummer. And so now fast forward, Mike D basically said to me, hey, Ulysses, you're great at all these other things, but like I really think you have a very specific vibe that's special with big band. And I think there's a way that you communicate your spirit and the spirit of the music in ways that you don't do in other things. So I really think you should do that. So I would say this record is really my chance to kind of give myself to the music in a way that I think is really, really special.
Just in that story right there, you mentioned a lot of really heavy cats, from Kurt Elling to Christian McBride, Lewis Nash, and Wynton Marsalis was mentioned prior. What have you learned from all these heavy cats throughout your career that has in turn helped you as a teacher lead that to the younger generations?
I'll tell you, I'll give you something from each one of them. And I don't do this often, but I'll give it to you. Wynton always said to me, be a serious, and obviously I'll give you the rated R version. You can write the PG version or whatever. Wynton said, be a serious motherfucker. he said, because there's a lot of non-serious people in the world. And he said, Ulysses, that's one of the things I love about you. He said, you've always been serious since the day I met you at 18. And so from Wynton, I learned, be serious and be unapologetic about being serious about this music, because it deserves our true love and it deserves our all. So one, McBride taught me, be one of the greatest musicians in the world. Seek to play that instrument in a way that nobody can fucking play it. And that he sort of taught me trial by fire. Like, so McBride's not a talker when it comes to music, but his thing is follow me. So he really taught me, no matter what you feel, no matter whatever, like play your, like don't complain, don't get caught up in all the semantics. Play your instrument and put your heart and soul into your instrument every night. You do that, that will transform people, and that transformation will open up doors for you. That's what McBride taught me.
Right on.
Kurt Elling taught me that you have to have a goal. You know, he says, Ulysses, from the time I was in Chicago, you know, in seminary school, and he had a chance to go down to the Green Mill and start his thing. He said, I always had a goal that I wanted to be a jazz singer. He said, and I didn't care about whether it was going to be Grammys or anything. He said, because I didn't know of any of that. But what I knew was, he said, I'd heard John Hendricks, you know, I'd heard Mark, forget my man's last name, who's a big influence on Kurt. It's going to bug me. But anyway, Mark Murphy. You know, he'd heard Mark Murphy. You know, he'd heard Sheila Jordan. You know, he'd heard, you know, spent some time with John Hendricks. So his has always been, Ulysses, when you decide what you want to be and whatever that is, whatever the packaging of that is, like, stick to that goal and be it, again, unapologetically. So yeah, those are a few of the things that some of the, I mean, it's so much more, but yeah, I'll leave you with those three.
No, that's good. And, you know, you already mentioned the Grammy. You've gotten accolades in your life. I don't want to know about the best award you got, but what accolade did you get that totally floored you? You didn't see it, you didn't expect it, and it's remained special.
Man, I have to be honest. I think the first Grammy. I mean, like I told you, I did not know. Like, I'm a guy from Jacksonville, Florida, that moved to New York, and I wanted to be the next Lewis Nash, which meant for me was playing as much as I could and touring as much as I could. That was all I thought that I would do. When Kurt Elling called me, we had done his record, John Coltrane, Dedicated to You, the music of John Coltrane and Johnny Hartman. And so I remember we done the record, we recorded live at Lincoln Center. I was already on cloud nine because, you know, we recorded live at Jazz at Lincoln Center. You know, we recorded it for Concord Universal. You know, so if I died and went to heaven that year, I was already good, right? Yeah. Then he called me that December. I never forget, I was sitting in Harlem. I was having food with friends, and he calls me and he says, Ulysses, we got nominated for a Grammy. And I said, what? Like, what do you mean? Like, I was already just happy, you know, being in your band, being on the road with you, being able to, like, make a steady income that I could afford an apartment, you know, like, then I was seeing the world. Then you record me because, you know, for a young jazz musician, you know, I spent many years being the sub guy where I subbed for so many people, but nobody ever would record with me, you know. So to have a guy that says, okay, I'm going to record, and then now that recording is now getting the attention of the Grammys. Then fast forward, you know, 4 or 5 months later, and we won. That is something that like completely changed my life because it was no longer Ulysses, a jazz musician out here hustling. It was now the word Grammy was associated with my name. So that completely blindsided me and forever changed my life and forever changed my career. So I did not expect that, nor was I even looking for that.
So the one thing about being in this quarantine, pandemic, lockdown world is that it's been an intense time, I think, for everyone to look within, to learn things about ourselves and the world around us. What did you discover about yourself and the world that you didn't realize, or it wasn't that much into focus prior to all of this happening?
Well, there's a few things. One, I think it was meant for me to be still. I always say to people, this pandemic sat me still in a way that I had not been still in over 15 years. I had not been in one city for more than a month in 15 years. So that was a whole psychological thing. Then two, it made me approach things that I've been saying I was going to do, but I never took the time to do. Like, I've been saying I was going to, like, build a little studio. I've been saying I was going to, you know, learn Pro Tools. I've been saying that I was going to, like, you know, create, sort of do the things that would make me a little bit more sufficient artistically. And also, so anyway, I had time to do that. I have a little production studio here. I've learned all those things. I'm now, you know, sending files all over the world, producing, you know, various things all from here. So that was a huge thing. And then I would say the other part of it was I fell back in love with music because I think that before the pandemic, music, you know, especially when you get to a certain point when you start really building a career, everything about music becomes career driven. So it becomes, okay, well, I'm going to make this record because I want this career accolade, or I want to play with this person because it'll push me up to do this, or I want to do this because then it'll give me more bookings. Like, so you kind of shift into this like more methodical place. And when the pandemic came and it was no work, and not only was there no work, none of us knew when the hell work was going to come back. So it made us, we couldn't even be like, yeah, you know, I mean, it's, you know, we're sitting home for 6 months, but we'll be back. It was like, we don't even know when we'll be back. So that made me say, okay, you know what, if I'm never able to get on stage again, do I still love this music? And the answer was yes. And I fell deeper in love with it than I'd ever been in love with it, to the point where I started a jam session here in Jacksonville back in October, because I said, listen, I don't know if I'll ever be back on stage in the way that we've been, but I got to play every week. I need to play, and I need to create for people. And so, yeah, this pandemic made me fall back in love with music, and particularly playing jazz, and separate from whatever the monetary gain or career gain could be.
You know, obviously you mentioned some very key things about learning Pro Tools and some technical things, and I've heard a lot of things. You know, when this all began, I did a lot of interviews, and I kind of had an epiphany thinking of all the artists in the world, jazz musicians are the most adept to probably capture what's going on now, because this is improv. This is getting thrown into the unknown. This is like, you know what? This is taking the upside down and turning it into a way that people are going to really want to hear in a very auditory sense and otherwise. So how do you think the jazz world will emerge stronger once we get out of this COVID world? What's going to be the strengths of the world?
Well, I don't know. I have a lot of questions about the jazz world, because first of all, I think that we are stuck. You know, I always use the quote that Joey Barron, great drummer, gave me many years ago, and I love it. And he said, jazz is a museum and a jail. And, you know, we are a museum because we're stuck in many ways in the past. Yes, we revere our those that came before us, but we're almost trapped by it. You know, even to the point where we're like, oh, have you checked out so-and-so? She sounds just like Ella. Have we checked out someone? Sounds just like Blake. Blakey and Ella have been dead for decades. Why are we still comparing some new person to someone that's been dead? They don't do it in any other industry except for jazz. They don't say, oh, Beyonce's great because she's the next Michael Jackson who's dead. No, Beyonce's amazing because she's Beyonce, right? So I feel like jazz is very antiquated, and we're very trapped by our own beauty and of history. So will we make it through the pandemic or on the other side of it? I do think we will. The question is, what direction will we go? Because I think we were already lost before the pandemic. And then I think now, you know, you have a lot of people who lost work and lost, you know, their resources. So I don't know where jazz is going to be. I also think that we had to deal with a major technological deficiency that our genre had, that no other genre had. You know, everybody else was already engaging in certain things technologically, but jazz musicians, like, we were late to the party because we thrive, us and classical musicians, because we thrive so much on the audience-to-audience connection. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what we'll do. I mean, I know what I'm going to do, but we'll see what we're able to do. I mean, I do think that jazz education will preserve it on some level, but I wonder if we will become more specialized and more niche because, you know, when things open back up, you know, everything is going to go to the majors. So to answer your question, I don't know where we're going to be because I already think we needed to retool our model.
Yeah, true that. Yeah, I dig it. So, you know, let's say you have a dream tonight. You run into your younger self, like around the time before you went to New York and you were becoming a professional, and you could give your younger self one piece of advice based on what you learned throughout all these years. What would it be?
Keep being you. I would literally say this to my younger self. Keep being you. Don't change anything, because everything that you think you want, and even the things that you don't even imagine that's for you, are on its way to you. So just keep being you.
Right on. Why do you love jazz?
I love it because it is the greatest art form in the entire world, because it encompasses everything in the world, right? So jazz first is the study of music, right? To study and love this music is to study the principles in the form like everything else, right? So I first love it. I love jazz because it connects to the study of music. Then I love jazz because then it breaks every rule in music, right? Like, you study all this shit to figure it out, but then you realize the greater you get at it, you actually let go of the structure. And then that's what life is, right? Like, life is all about, you're fortunate to have good parents. They sort of teach you what to do, and then you spend your adult life sort of deciding for yourself what things you're going to actually do and create. And then within jazz is freedom, and then within jazz is the connection to the audience. Like because of jazz, I have connected with people on a whole other frequency of life that I would not have connected in or on had I done something else. So I think jazz is the greatest thing because it's structure, it's freedom, it's personal expression, and it's beauty, and it belongs to us. And as an African American man, it comes from my ancestors. So yeah, that's why I love it for all those reasons. And also that I can't explain it. Sorry.
Well,
I also love the part of jazz that I will never understand. It's something that I will always be going after, and that I love as well.
Yeah, totally. So if you could get into a time machine, Jazz DeLorean, and go back in time, what show, what musician, any musician would you see, and who would you want to talk to?
I think I'd love to sit down. I think I would probably, I'm torn. I think it would be either sit down with Art Blakey or I'd sit down with Betty Carter, because I think that both of them were obviously prolific musicians, but they were business people and they were paradigm shifters. And they also had a forward concept of education. And that's who I am. So I would love to sit down with Blakey and be like, okay, are you actively building this institution in your band, or you're just trying to keep cats in your band? Is this an active thing you're trying to do? Or to Betty, are you actively hiring all these young guys so you can train them, or you're just hiring them because they're cheap? I loved it because what they created were institutions, and in Blakey's band particularly, every person, with the exception of probably Herbie or Pat Metheny, but just about every person, of note in jazz today is connected to that Blakey legacy. And between Blakey and Miles and Betty Carter, just about every influential jazz musician came from one of those three institutions, including Chick Corea, including Herbie, everybody. So it'd be interesting, have that conversation with them and understand, what did they do, or what did they sacrifice, or what did they choose or not choose to kind of be these incubators for really amazing talent. So yeah, it would be Blakey or Betty.
Everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, fans, students, but you're the one living your life. Who do you think you are?
I think that I am a very serious person with a purpose, living unapologetically, but with a really, really, really big heart. But I'm also very, very driven. So, and I've had a lot of challenges in my life, and so because of that, I'm very driven, and I know that nothing will stop me unless I allow it to stop me. So that's who I think that I am.
Perfect, man. Thank you, Ulysses. Good luck with everything, with the album, and the return to the stage. Thank you, sir.
Cool, man. Take care, brother.
Take care, man.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Florida, New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Ulysses for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.